In this video, we're going to walk through two different things. One is how to use the projectile factory to shoot some projectiles from this flying eye creature. We're going to focus on the logic that connects the character itself and all of the game systems with projectile factory. And then we're also going to walk through the logic of connecting that projectile with the player that the projectile hits, including connecting the game module's stats system and causing damage. And as a bonus, we'll talk about how we connect the stats with the portraits to make them shake whenever they get impacted and also have the health bar drop. All right, let's start out by looking at our flying eye. Open the prefab here. The flying eye has a whole lot of components on it, including, of course, a projectile spawner. This is from the projectile factory, and this is the thing that spawns projectiles. There's only one method we have to call in order to make the projectile spawn, but we can do some additional things before we spawn a projectile, like saying the target or changing the projectile out, both of which we'll do in this example. Now keep in mind, there are infinite ways you can call the spawn projectile method. How you call it is entirely up to you and your game. Every game might be slightly different. What I'm going to present today is one way of doing it. You can use this way, or you can modify it, or you can choose an entirely different way. It really does depend on your game and how your game operates. So the main character class here is this NPC state data. This is the thing that we serialize and save between play sessions. And when we're moving, we have our NPC movement class. And then we have different movement behaviors. Right now, I'm working on the move and attack, which happens during the real-time and turn-based attack phase. I'm going to have a turn-based version soon, but I'm going to finish working on the real-time version first. Now, I'm going to gloss over the tick method here, which is the update. But basically, we're going to be checking to see if we can do a melee attack. And if we can't, we're going to check to see if we can do a range attack. And if we can, we're going to do a range attack. Now, each attack themselves are behaviors on scriptable objects. And so let's load up this Flying Eye Cast 2. It's an NPC projectile attack. You can see here we have two projectiles. One is the warm-up and one is the magic bolt, which is the thing that actually fires and shoots at the actor. And we also have the animation trigger and a recovery time. The recovery time plays into the logic of how long it takes between attacks. Now, this attack behavior is fairly straightforward. Since this is a scriptable object, it's going to be an instance of the scriptable object in runtime. We need it to be an instance so that we don't overwrite the actual data on the scriptable object itself. And then we call this setup method. In the setup, we assign our projectile spawner to be the state data value. That's the thing we save. That's a mono behavior. And we're going to assign the projectile spawner. That way, this class knows who the projectile spawner is. Now we have this animation event method. When this is called, if the event name is spawn projectile, then we're going to do the spawn projectile. The operation will iterate through the projectiles in the list here. The idea is that the animation event will be called the same number of times as the projectiles. So this will be one full run through of all the projectiles. This character in this attack will spawn. Often there will only be just one. Now this does inherit from NPC attack, which itself inherits from NPC behavior. And in NPC behavior, we're subscribing to animation events on the NPC state data. Again, NPC state data is our master class. This is the NPC brains that gets saved and serialized between play sessions. And this is a mono behavior, which is important because mono behaviors can receive animation event triggers. So how does this animation event method actually get called? That gets called on the animation itself. So I'm going to navigate to the Flying Eye model, and the animations are on the Magic Eye demo. I'm using the demo animations because they already had a bunch of animation events set up. I'm expanding this, and so let's select Cast 2 and check out the animation events. And this is the event here. We're just calling the function animation event with the string spawn projectile. We're doing that here, and we're also doing that right here. And so there's twice in this animation loop, in this one animation clip. So of course, NPC state data is a mono behavior. So this gets called right here, and that's when we trigger our on animation event. We pass that event name through. The NPC projectile attack object is subscribed to that, so it'll get the animation event. And we check to make sure the animation event name is spawn projectile, and if it is, we do our spawn projectile. So the first thing we do here is set the target. Now, you could set this on the spawner itself. If you know that your spawner is only ever going to have one target and that target's already in the scene, that is the easiest way to do it. Just set it right here in the projectile spawner. But in this game, we're actually instantiating the enemies at runtime. So we need to populate this dynamically via script, and we're doing that right here when we spawn our projectile. This also means that later on, if I decide that I want this enemy to attack something else, then I can change the target and have it target something else instead. And then we call the spawn projectile. We're going to pass the projectile over. This is now the projectile factory script. And since we are passing a new projectile object over here, it's going to set that projectile first and then launch it just like any other projectiles. And so that's how we handle spawning projectiles on the flying eye in this project. Now, this is an RPG project that's going to be fairly complicated with its setup because every NPC is going to be dynamic and different, and there's going to be lots of different monsters spawning lots of different projectiles, including the player spawning projectiles. So we do have the behavior-based system for my attacks and for my movement and other things. Your game might be much more simple. Many games are much more simple and more straightforward. So let's check out the next section. In this section, we're going to discuss how to connect Projectile Factory with game modules. Game modules is my very wonderful tool that has stats and conditions and items. If you're making a large scale game, especially like an RPG or something where you have a lot of different things and all those different things might affect the stats of NPCs or of the player, the game modules is designed to make it easier to manage such a large project, including a lot of the math, the automated math and calculations that go along with that. Once you set it up, everything is, for the most part, automated. So let's look at this projectile. This is the Flying Eye Magic Bolt, and we have a projectile class, which means it is a projectile. And we also have this projectile game modules connection script. Now, if you are using the game modules and you want to copy this, by all means, freeze the video and go ahead and copy it. I'm not going to deliver this as a script for people to use because it is ultimately somewhat custom to this project. Your project might be exactly the same, in which case, by all means, just copy this. Otherwise, use the same general logic or modify it slightly for your project. So this class is an I have stats. This is the thing that's going to hold the stats. Whenever you have a character that shoots a projectile, that projectile might still be in the world on its way to its target when the character dies and maybe gets destroyed. So you need to copy the stats to this projectile so that if the parent object, the enemy or player, dies, then the projectile can still do damage calculations using those stats. In order to set everything up, we have a setup method, and we're going to pass the actor into this. For those of you who know the game modules already, the actor, it derives from game modules inventory actor. If you're creating your own actor class, definitely derive it from game modules inventory actor if you're using the inventory system, or derive it from the game modules actor if you're not. Check out the docs for all the details on the game modules actor, but it does all the heavy lifting for you. A lot of the setup and everything else is handled for you. Then you create your own actor class, which has additional methods that are unique to your game. So this connection object will keep track of who the actor is and also a clone of the stats. During our setup, we assign the actor. Again, the actor might end up null by the time this actually collides with an object. And we copy a clone of the stats to this list. We're also going to set the owner of the stats list and then update the parent list references in the children so that this stat list, the clone, has the correct references to this object rather than the parent object that spawned this projectile. And the other side of this is the do damage. This happens when the projectile collides with an object. So how do we actually call these? Well, we're going to use the projectile factory for this. I've created a new spawn modification behavior and assigned that here. It's called connect game modules. So let's go ahead and look at this. It has nothing exposed in the inspector because it doesn't really need to. All it does is on spawn. We're going to do our base on spawn. Then we will find the projectile game modules connection object, get the actor. This is going to be the spawner's I am game modules actor. In this case, it's our actor class. And then call setup on the actor, which will of course do all of our setup actions. Now back on our projectile, we also have a new behavior, game modules connection hit. Same thing, there's no extra, there's only the default options here. And if we check out this script, it's just overriding the collision enter. And we're going to find out which object we hit. It could be the object hit, but if that's null, then we're going to look for it in the collision. And then we're going to grab our connection object and call do damage on the object hit. And that is this method here. We're going to try to get the component IamGameModules_Actor, and if it has a GameModules_Actor, then we're going to call take damage. Now, take damage is on our actor class. Both our NPCs and our player derive from the actor class, so they both can take damage in the exact same way. Now, just as an aside, I have a static class called Legend Maths, and this is going to have all of the common math functions I'm going to need in the game, such as compute damage. So this is my current compute damage. It essentially is a very classic D&D, X, D, Y plus Z. In this case, we're either going to be doing range damage or melee damage. The character might have different stats for each. So we're going to get the shoot or the attack. That's the number of die rolls, the damage per die roll, and then the bonus. We'll just get the minimum possible and the maximum possible based on those values, and then get a random amount between those. Now, we still have to do the armor class and resistances, and I'm also going to augment these values by luck, so if the character is very lucky, then they're going to have a better chance of getting a better roll. But those are all things I'll add later on in development. For right now, we just need the basic do some math on the damage. So here's the bonus thing. I'm going to show you how I connect the portraits to the game modules as well. When we take damage, we're going to get our hit points. Hit points is a game stat. I've created a property for it on our actor, which is just using the get stat. And this uses our properties class, which is automatically created by game modules. So you can very easily get the unique ID, the UID of each stat. So hit points is going to be get stat, property stat, hit points UID. And so to that game stat, we're just going to add points and our damage. Now, as a reminder, we do invert our damage here. So we're passing a negative value over. And so it will reduce our hit points when we add points because we're adding a negative value. Our portrait object has a reference to our health bar. And we use the game module's Blackboard to know when the value has changed on the health. So let's load up our portrait's UI elements, and we can see that this is a Blackboard follower. A Blackboard follower is a mono behavior that follows the Blackboard. Any object that you want to follow the Blackboard should be derived from this because it automatically subscribes to the Blackboard, and it has these two methods for you to override, the receive change and the receive event. So in our portrait UI elements class, we do override the receive change. And that receive change, we bring in our Blackboard note. If the Blackboard note name is not equal to our player game ID, that's a unique game ID on the player, and it's set up when we set up this portrait, then we return. Otherwise, if the subject is hit points or hit points max final stat or magic points max final stat, then we're going to set the health bar or the magic bar to the hit points %. This is a property I've created on the actor that just does the math. So it's a little bit easier rather than having to do the math over and over to have just this one property. When we call this, we also are recomputing the stats immediately rather than waiting one more frame for them to automatically recompute. And if you ever want to remember what the Blackboard variables will look like, just go to your stats, and Blackboard Note subjects are going to be right here in the inspector for you. So the attack distance is going to be attack distance dash points, final value, final proficiency, or final stat. So you can refer to those if you'd like to remember what they might be. So that's how we connect this game's custom logic and custom data, which uses the game modules 4 package with the projectile factory, and also passing that data upon collision to an enemy who gets hit and updating the health bar accordingly. If you have any questions, come to the Discord. Keep in mind there are so many different ways to accomplish the same task. This is just one of them. It might work for your game. Your game might need something slightly different or might need something more simple. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye.